Garam was dancing. Not well, and not in any way he would have admitted to under oath, but the brushroom door was shut and the house was empty, and the man he had spent a year dreading was, as of 3 days ago, dead. So Garam was dancing. He had a stick of ink in one hand and he was conducting an invisible orchestra of his own relief, spinning across the floorboards in his stocking feet, singing under his breath a song he was making up as he went, the chorus of which was only the word "free" at various pitches. Jun was dead. The arranged alpha, the vain golden heir to the most powerful house in the capital, the man who had once spent a whole dinner describing the cut of his own jaw as though it were a gift, was dead in some northern skirmish, killed doing something reckless on a borrowed horse in front of the right audience. And the bonding writ that had hung over Garam's neck for a year, the writ that promised to chain him for life, to a man who loved mirrors more than he would ever love a husband, had died right along with the groom. A bond needed 2 living parties. Garam had checked. No groom, no bond, no marriage, and for the first time since the writ arrived, he was a free man. He spun once more and landed badly against the low table and laughed at the ceiling. "I am sorry you are dead," he told the empty room in the tone of a man who wasn't sorry at all. Truly a great loss to someone, somewhere. The door slid open. Garam looked up expecting Sayajin, the only person rude enough to enter without a sound, and found instead a stranger filling the whole doorway. Tall enough to make the room feel smaller, in the dark, travel-worn clothes of a man who had been on a long road, a pale old scar through one eyebrow, his face doing nothing at all. He smelled of struck flint and cold ash, and a low, dark sweetness underneath. Garam's body, which had been having an excellent morning, went very still. The stranger looked at him on the floor, at the inkstick in his fist, at the half-sung relief still hanging in the air. Then he reached into his coat and set a folded document on the table, and Garam did not need to open it to know the weight and the seal and the dread of it. It was the writ. "You are Garam Son," the stranger said. His voice was low and flat and entirely unbothered, a voice that had given orders in worse rooms than this one. "I am Doyun. Jun was my brother." "Oh," Garam said. His mind was scrambling up a wall with no handholds. "I am, that is, my condolences. Truly, he was so. He had a remarkable jaw." "He did," Doyun agreed, which was not the response Garam had braced for. "You were dancing," Doyun added. "That is a regional mourning practice." "It is not." Garam got to his feet because being on the floor was making this worse, and brushed at his clothes with great dignity, and tried to arrange his face into the agreeable softness he had worn for 25 years, the face that made people decide he was no trouble. He could feel his own scent doing something he hated, crushed mint and river clay, the smell he gave off when he was caught. "This has been a lovely surprise," Garam said, "and I am terribly sorry for your loss, and I should not keep you. You must have a great deal of grieving to be getting on with, so." Doyun put one finger on the writ and slid it an inch closer to Garam. "The contract binds the houses, not the man," Doyun said. "My brother's death does not dissolve it. It transfers it. I am the head of my house now. The alliance stands. The debt stands." A pause, and the next words landed with the calm of a man reading a map aloud. "I am here to fulfill the contract in his place." The morning, which had been going so well, ended. Every plan he had made in 3 giddy days, the freedom, the open road, the life that finally belonged to him, folded itself up small and slid off the edge of the table along with his stomach. He looked at this enormous, unsmiling warlord standing in his brushroom offering to marry him out of bookkeeping, and the agreeable mask slipped, and what came out of his mouth was neither soft nor careful. "You cannot be serious," Garam said. "I would rather marry the horse that killed him." There was a silence in the brushroom that had its own weather. "Before I dive in, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. I love reading everyone. All right, now back to the story. To understand the size of the disaster Garam had just authored, you have to go back to the beginning, to the year before the dancing, when the writ first arrived and a soft-spoken young man with a gift for calligraphy and a talent for being no trouble found out he had been promised away. Garam Zone had been born into a house that was running out of everything except its name. The Zone family had been important once, generations back, important enough that the name still opened certain doors, though the rooms behind those doors had grown smaller and colder every year. By the time Garam was old enough to understand the family's situation, the understanding came to him sideways and unspoken, in the worried set of his mother's shoulders and in how often his father counted things twice. There was one asset left that the Zone house could trade on, and it was Garam. An omega of good lineage, pleasant, presentable, a son who could be matched upward into a stronger house and pull his whole family up the rope behind him. This was explained to him gently, lovingly and constantly, until being pleasant and presentable stopped feeling like a personality and started feeling like a job. Garam learned young to make himself easy. He learned to soften his opinions before they left his mouth, to laugh at the right moments, to be the guest everyone was glad they invited and no one quite remembered. It was, his mother said, his gift. It was not his gift. His gift was the brush. Calligraphy had come to him the way water finds the lowest path, naturally and without anyone teaching him. He had picked up a brush as a small child and found, to his astonishment, a place where he was allowed to be exacting. Over a sheet of paper he was permitted things that were forbidden everywhere else in his life. He could be impatient. He could be ruthless. He could throw away 9 attempts because the 10th might be right and refuse to apologize to anyone for the waste. The brush did not need him to be agreeable. The brush needed him to be honest, and Garam, who was honest in no other corner of his existence, poured every withheld and unwelcome truth of himself onto paper in lines of black ink. And the results were good. They were better than good. He never showed them to anyone who mattered because the version of Garam that lived on the page was nothing like the soft, easy son the family was trying to sell, and he had learned that the two could not be seen in the same room. Then he turned 24 and the writ arrived, and the name on it was Jun. Jun of the house that had everything the Zone house had lost. Jun the heir, Jun the golden, Jun who was spoken of in the capital, the way you speak of weather you are grateful for. Garam's parents wept with relief. The rope had finally been thrown. All Garam had to do was climb it, and the climbing was simple. All he had to do was be exactly what he had been trained to be, pleasant and presentable and no trouble at all for the rest of his natural life, beside a man he had disliked on sight. He met Jun 3 times before the death. The first meeting, Jun spoke about himself for the length of a full meal and asked Garam one question, which was whether Garam agreed that Jun's profile was best appreciated from the left. The second meeting, Jun arrived late, blamed a tailor, and spent the visit composing a letter to someone else. The third meeting, Jun did not arrive at all and sent word that something more interesting had come up. And Garam sat alone in a tea house in his best clothes and felt, under the humiliation, a small, treacherous hope that maybe this man would simply forget the wedding entirely. He did better than forget it. He went north to play soldier because a campaign was glamorous and his father indulged him. And he did something brave and stupid in front of the right people, and he died. Garam had been informed by letter. He had read the letter twice to be sure, and then he had gone into the brush room and shut the door and begun, very quietly, to dance. Which brings us back to the warlord in the doorway, and the horse, and the silence with weather in it. Doyun looked at Garam for a long moment. Garam waited for the rage. He knew the shape of alpha rage, had been taught to fear it since before he could spell the word, and he braced for it now. The raised voice, the command laced with pheromone that would bend his spine whether he willed it or not. It did not come. The horse survived, Doyun said. If it is a consideration. Then he picked up the writ, tucked it back into his coat, inclined his head a precise and unhurried amount, and left, sliding the door shut behind him with a soft and final click. Garam stood alone in the brush room, with his heart going like a war drum, and absolutely no idea what had just happened to him. Sejin found out within the hour, because Sejin found out everything within the hour, and arrived at the zone house out of breath and delighted in the particular way of a friend whose own life is going fine, and who has just learned that yours has caught fire. "Say it again," Sejin demanded, dropping onto a cushion. "Say the part about the horse." "I will not." "You told the dead man's brother, the warlord, the man who has personally ended more lives than you have written letters, that you would rather marry the horse that trampled his brother to death. It did not trample him. The letter was vague. This is the finest thing you have ever done." Sejin wiped at the corner of one eye. "I am going to put it on your gravestone, which, given who you insulted, may be sooner than we hoped." Garam threw a cushion at him. "He is going to honor the contract, the writ transfers. He said the alliance stands, the debt stands. He is going to marry me out of accounting." He pressed his hands to his face. "I was free for 3 days. I had plans. I was going to travel. I was going to see the southern coast and be insufferable to no one but myself." Sejin, to his credit, stopped laughing. "You really do not want this," he said. "I would rather be poor." Garam said it fast before he could soften it, and it was the truest thing he had said aloud in a year. "I would rather the whole house fall down around me than spend my life being managed by another man who chose me off a piece of paper. Jun wanted a pretty thing to stand next to his jaw. This one wants a stamped document to balance a ledger. There is no difference. I am furniture either way. At least furniture does not have to smile." Sejin was quiet, and then he said gently, "Your parents." "I know. The debt is real, Garam. The Sohn house. If the alliance breaks." "I know." Garam dropped his hands. His eyes were dry because he had learned long ago that crying changed nothing and only made his nose run. "Which is why I cannot simply refuse. If I refuse, my family pays for it. So I cannot say no." A slow, dangerous idea was uncurling in him, an idea the brush would have approved of, ruthless and exacting, and entirely his own. But he can. He can what? He can say no. Garam looked up and he smiled, and it was nothing like the soft, agreeable smile he wore in public. It had teeth in it. "If I cannot break the contract without ruining my family, then I will simply make myself impossible to marry. I will be so unbearable, so high-handed, so wretched to live with, that he calls it off himself. He keeps his honor, my family keeps the alliance, and I keep my freedom. He came here expecting a pleasant, presentable little Omega who will be grateful for the rescue." The smile widened. "He is going to get the worst person in the kingdom." Sejin looked at his oldest friend with the expression of a man watching someone load a cannon while standing in front of it. "He commands armies," Sejin said. "And I command a brush and a truly upsetting personality that I have been suppressing for 25 years. Garam said, getting to his feet. "I like my odds. Now help me think of demands. Outrageous ones. We have a war to lose." The first engagement, as Sejin would later record it in the running dispatch he insisted on keeping, took place 2 days later when Doyun came to formally call on the zone house and discuss the arrangements. Garam had prepared. He received the warlord in the receiving room with his family arranged behind him, his mother pale with hope, his father gripping the situation like a man holding a boat against a current, and Garam, dressed in his finest and seated like a prince, proceeded to be the most exhausting human being the kingdom of Nauru had produced in a generation. He had requirements, he explained. If he was to be married, there were standards. He could not possibly sleep in a room that faced east. The light was an assault. He required the household to be silent before mid-morning, as he did his best thinking late and his best sleeping later. He had a delicate constitution and could not abide the smell of pickled things or wool or any flower that began with the letter that began the word for chrysanthemum. He was unclear on which letter that was, but the staff would simply have to guess and be wrong at their peril. He would need a great deal of paper, the good kind, the expensive kind, and ink ground fresh each morning by someone whose hands he had personally approved. He could not be expected to attend functions. He found people draining. He could not be expected to skip functions either, as he found being left out insulting. He hoped this was all clear. He laid it on with a trowel. He invented allergies on the spot. He contradicted himself twice in the same breath and dared the room to notice. His mother had gone quietly pale. His father had stopped breathing. And Doyun, seated across from him with his scarred hands resting on his knees, listened to all of it without moving, the way a mountain listens to weather. When Garam finally ran out of demands, breathless and triumphant and certain he had thoroughly ruined himself, Doyun was quiet for a moment. "East-facing room is the smaller one anyway," he said. "You can have the west. The household is already silent before mid-morning. Soldiers sleep when they can and wake without noise. No pickled things, no wool, no flowers beginning with the dangerous letter." A pause. "I will have the paper sent tomorrow. The good kind. I do not know what hands you approve of, so you will have to grind your own ink until you have met the staff and rejected them properly." Garam stared at him. "As for functions," Doyun went on in the same flat, unbothered voice, "I dislike them as well. We can be left out together and be insulted as a pair. It will save time." "That," Garam said, "is not. You are supposed to." "I am supposed to what?" "Object to something. You have not yet said anything worth objecting to," Doyun said, and stood, and bowed to Garam's parents with a courtesy that made Garam's mother nearly faint with relief, and took his leave. Sejin's dispatch for that evening read, in its entirety: Day 1. Our forces deployed every demand in the arsenal. The enemy agreed to all of them and offered to be insulted alongside us at parties. Casualties. Garam's entire strategy. Morale. Low. It got worse before it got better, which is to say it got much worse. Garam escalated. He had to. The whole theory depended on Doyun cracking, and a man who simply agreed to everything could not be made to crack by agreement, so Garam moved to open warfare. He staged a tantrum over the quality of the paper, which was in fact the finest paper he had ever held, and which he had to physically restrain himself from admiring. He sent back 3 sets of writing brushes as inadequate and kept in secret, the one he liked. He arrived late to a planning meeting, then complained that the meeting had started without him, then complained that it had waited. He developed strong opinions about the household's lamp oil. He wept theatrically over a stain on a sleeve and accused in turn the laundry, the weather, and the concept of fabric. Doyun absorbed all of it. He had the lamp oil changed. He had a second laundry attempt made. He listened to the opinions about the brushes with the grave attention of a man receiving a battlefield report, and then provided, without comment, a 4th set of brushes that happened to be exactly what Garam had secretly wanted, which was so unnerving that Garam threw those back too, on principle, and then lay awake that night, mourning them. The campaign reached a new front the week Doyun insisted, with the polite immovability of a man who had decided something, that they spend time together before the wedding. It was sensible. It was even decent. Garam treated it as an act of war. The first outing, Doyun proposed a walk along the river where the 3 trade waters met. The stone bridges and the dock markets and the fog coming off the water, gray and soft in the early light. It was, Garam noted with private fury, genuinely beautiful. A morning a person might actually want to share. So he ruined it. He complained about the fog, which was damp. He complained about the sun, which arrived later and was bright. He insisted on stopping at every stall in the market and finding fault with the wares. The fish too fishy, the cloth too cloth-like, the pottery insufficiently round, and then refused to buy any of it on the grounds that he could not possibly be expected to make decisions before he had eaten, having declined, loudly, to eat. Doyun walked beside him through all of it with his hands behind his back and said almost nothing, and at the end of the market, without comment, he stopped at a stall, bought a single warm bun, and put it in Garam's hand. "You said you could not decide before you ate," Doyun said. "Decide later. Eat now." Garam looked at the bun. He looked at the warlord. He wanted to throw the bun in the river to prove a point, and he could not because it smelled wonderful, and he was, in fact, starving. And Doyun was watching him with that flat, patient attention that saw through everything. So Garam ate the bun in furious silence, and it was good, and that was somehow the worst defeat yet. "Good?" Doyun asked. "It is acceptable," Garam said with his mouth full, and Doyun looked away toward the water, but not before Garam caught the corner of his mouth doing the thing, the small, almost amusement, and the plum bloomed treacherously across the dock, and a passing merchant turned his head, and Garam wanted to walk directly into the river and live there. Sejin's dispatch that night. Day 9. Enemy deployed a bun. Our forces ate the bun. Strategic situation deteriorating rapidly. Garam has begun composing poetry about a warlord's forearms and denies it when confronted. "I did not write poetry," Garam said, reading over his shoulder. "You wrote half a line and then scratched it out so hard you tore the paper. That was a calligraphy exercise. It said, 'His hands when he'. His hands when he. What, Garam? It was an exercise." The second outing was the one Garam had truly engineered to end things. He had learned that Doyun, for all his stillness, had one tell, one thing that reached him, and it was incompetence dressed up as confidence. The warlord could endure any amount of rudeness, but he could not abide a person being wrong with their whole chest. So Garam decided to be magnificently, aggressively wrong on purpose for an entire afternoon, until the man's patience finally broke and he said something sharp and Garam could seize on it as proof that they would never suit. They were to ride out to see a piece of land that came with the alliance, and Garam, who could ride perfectly well, announced that he could not ride at all, had never ridden, found horses morally objectionable after what one of them did to poor Jun, and would require to be led the entire way like a sack of valuable but inconvenient grain. He then proceeded to give the man leading the horse a stream of contradictory instructions. "Faster, no slower, not that way. Why are we going this way? Are you certain this is a horse and not some lesser animal?" Until the poor groom was sweating and Garam was delighted, and Doyun, riding alongside, said nothing at all. When they reached the land, Garam expanded his campaign of confident wrongness to the landscape itself. He identified with total authority a stand of pine as oak. He declared a perfectly ordinary stream to be the wrong kind of stream. He looked at a hill and pronounced it, in defiance of all observable reality, a valley. He was waiting the whole time for Doyun to correct him, to lose patience, to finally treat him as every other alpha eventually did, as a thing to be managed and put right. Doyun listened to him call the hill a valley. He looked at the hill. He looked at Garam. "It is a hill," Doyun said. Then, after a moment, with no edge in it at all, only that flat, dry, literal calm. "But you are the only person I have ever met who could make me doubt it." Garam, who had braced for cruelty, was so disarmed by being teased instead of corrected that he laughed, a real one, helpless and surprised before he could stop himself, and the plum flooded the whole hillside, and a bird left a tree, and Doyun watched him laugh with an expression that was not flat at all, that was, for one unguarded moment, openly and quietly pleased. It did not last. A rider passed them on the road below, one of Doyun's own people by the colors, and called up some cheerful thing about the late June, about how the family must be glad to have the steady brother home to mind things now. Doyun lifted a hand in acknowledgement and said nothing, and the pleased look was gone as though it had never been there, and what replaced it was a stillness so complete that Garam, who had spent his life reading the weather of other people's faces, could not read it at all. He filed the moment away without knowing why, the way you keep a single thread that does not match the rest of the cloth, and then Doyun turned back toward the horses, and the afternoon went on. And Garam forgot to be at war for almost an hour. He understood, somewhere under all of it, that he was losing, badly, on every front, and that the thing he was losing was not the war he thought he had started. The thing that began to undo Garam, slowly, against his will, was that none of it landed the way mistreatment lands. Doyun never raised his voice. He never used the command. He did not make Garam feel small for sport, as Jun had, as the alphas Garam had learned to brace against eventually did. He simply took each absurd demand, weighed it, and either met it or declined it with a single flat sentence, and moved on. And the declining was somehow worse than the meeting, because when Doyun said no, he said it like it was information, not a verdict, and looked at Garam afterward like Garam was still a person he respected. It was infuriating. Garam complained about it to Saiyajin at length. "He is doing it on purpose," Garam said. "He is being reasonable at me. It is a tactic. No one is actually like this. Have you considered," Saiyajin said, "that you have spent your whole life around terrible people, and so a normal one looks like a conspiracy? That is the stupidest thing you have ever said. And yet." The trouble. The real trouble. The trouble Garam would not say out loud even to Saiyajin was the scent. Every time Doyun came near, Garam's own body betrayed the campaign. The crushed mint, the river clay, those he could explain away as nerves. But underneath, in the moments when Doyun said something dry and unexpected, and Garam forgot for half a second to be at war, a third note kept surfacing, low and sweet, bruised plum. The smell Garam only made when his guard came all the way down, the one he never made on purpose. He could not stop it. He would be mid-tantrum, fully committed to some invented grievance, and Doyun would meet his eyes with that flat, unimpressed steadiness and say something that was almost, nearly, the edge of funny, and the plum would bloom across the room before Garam could strangle it, and he would see Doyun's nostrils move, just once, registering it, and Garam would want to set the entire house on fire and lie down in it. Because the worst part, the part that made him grind his ink too hard and snap 2 brushes for real, was that when their scents were both in the room at once, flint and ash meeting mint and clay, they did not clash. They turned into something else, something neither of them carried alone, green and clean and startling, the smell of the first rain hitting a dry riverbed after a long summer. It was, he had to admit, a good smell. He hated that he liked it, with all the stubbornness of his exacting, unwilling heart. "I am winning," he told Saiyajin, who had stopped writing dispatches and started simply observing with the air of a man at a play. "You are not winning." "I am absolutely winning." He was not winning, and he found that out for certain on the worst evening of the campaign, the evening of the dinner, which Garam had designed as his masterpiece, and which became, instead, the moment the whole war turned over and showed him its other face. The dinner was meant to be the killing blow. Garam had engineered an evening so unpleasant that no man, however patient, however irritatingly reasonable, could endure it and still want to go through with a wedding. He arranged for dishes Doyun would dislike, then complained that Doyun was not eating. He talked without stopping on the dullest subjects he could summon. The proper aging of lamp wicks, the genealogy of a neighbor's cat, his own theories on weather, each one chosen for its power to bore a man to despair. He found fault with the room, the hour, the season. He was, by his own private scoring, magnificent. And across the low table, Doyun ate what he could, said little, and watched Garam perform with an attention that should have felt like judgment, and instead felt, increasingly, like company. Around the time Garam reached his third theory of weather, he made a tactical error. He glanced up to gauge the damage, expecting to find Doyun finally worn down, finally regretting, finally close to the cliff, and instead he found the warlord watching him with the faint, unmistakable beginning of amusement at the corner of his mouth, as though Garam were the most interesting thing that had walked into his life in a long while, and the plum note flooded the room so fast and so thick that Garam panicked. He needed the evening to end before his own body confessed everything, so he did the only thing he could think of. He pressed the back of his hand to his forehead, swayed where he sat, and announced in a fading voice that he was overcome, that he was faint, that the dinner had quite undone him, and he must retire at once. It was a lie. It was a transparent, theatrical, last-resort lie, and he was already half rising on it, fully prepared to stagger gracefully from the room and lock the door and breathe into a cushion. He misjudged the rising. His foot had gone to sleep beneath him through the long performance, and when he put his weight on it, the leg simply was not there, and the feint he had been faking became, with humiliating speed, a fall that was entirely real. He did not hit the floor. Doyun moved faster than a man that size had any right to. One moment he was across the table, the next he had Garam by the arms, holding him up, the whole solid warmth of him suddenly a hand's breadth away, ash and flint and dark beeswax flooding everything, and Garam's own scent answering it before he could clamp down, the two of them collapsing into that clean, green riverbed smell in the space between one breath and the next. Garam looked up. Doyun looked down. Neither of them moved. The lie was forgotten. The campaign was forgotten. There was only the warlord's hands steady on his arms, and the warlord's face closer than it had ever been. The old scar and the dark, unreadable eyes, and underneath all that flint, something that was not flat at all, something that had cracked open just slightly and was looking at Garam like he had never been furniture at all. "You did not eat," Doyun said quietly. "You talked the whole evening so that I would not notice you did not eat. You have not eaten properly in days. You think I do not see it." His grip gentled, but he did not let go. "I see all of it, Garam. I have seen it since the first morning." Garam's heart was a war drum again, and the plum was everywhere, and he opened his mouth to deny all of it, every word, the campaign and the scent and the riverbed and the fact that his body had stopped, for one traitorous instant, wanting to escape. And from the doorway, in a voice like a blade laid flat on cold stone, a woman said, "How touching." They both turned. Lady Hua stood in the entrance to the dining room, draped in the deep colors of mourning, her face arranged into something that was not grief, watching her dead son's intended and her living son holding each other in the lamplight. And in her hand, held up between two fingers like a card being played, was a second sealed document Garam had never seen. "Before you two get any further," she said, stepping into the room, "I think it is time someone told the little Omega exactly what he is being married for, and exactly what my Doyun stands to lose if this bond is not sealed by the turning of the season." Her eyes, cold and bright, moved to her son. "You did not tell him about the debt. Of course you did not. You were always the one who did the work and never the one who could explain why." Doyun's hands were still on Garam's arms. He did not let go, but something in his face had closed again, all the way, like a door at the end of a long corridor, and Garam, caught between the warmth of the warlord's grip and the cold of his mother's smile, understood that the war he thought he had been fighting was not the war at all, and that he was only now finding out its real name. Lady Hua did not sit. She stayed standing in room so that everyone else had to look up at her, and she looked down at Garam now with the unhurried satisfaction of a person who had been waiting a long time to deliver this particular blow. "My eldest was a fool," she said, and there was no grief in it, only fact. Jun spent money the way water spends a hillside. He borrowed against the house, against the alliance, against names that are not even ours to spend. By the time he got himself killed playing at war, this family owed more than it is worth to people who do not forgive debts. They collect them. Her gaze moved to her living son. The marriage to the Sohn house was never about your lineage, little Omega, charming as your name is in the old records. It was collateral. The alliance unlocks the only credit that keeps this house standing. No bond, no alliance, and both houses go under, yours and ours together. By the turning of the season, she tilted the sealed paper in her fingers. That is what Doyun came home to. That is what he is marrying you to save. I thought you should know what you are. Before the lamplight convinced you it was something prettier. The riverbed scent was gone from the room. Garam could not have said when it left. He was very aware of Doyun's hands still on his arms, and then he was aware of stepping back out of them. And Doyun let him go, and that was the part that hurt, that he let go so easily, like a man releasing something that was never his to hold. "Is it true?" Garam said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "All of it." Doyun did not look away from him. That was the thing Garam would think about later, that even now he did not look away. "Yes. The debt, the deadline, the marriage saves your house. Yes. And you knew. The first morning. When you walked into my brush room and put the writ on the table and told me you came to fulfill the contract, you already knew exactly how much you needed me to say yes." A pause. The smallest hesitation, the first Garam had ever seen in him. "Yes," Doyun said. Garam laughed. It was not a good laugh. "Of course," he said. "Of course. I should have known. I did know. I just let myself. For one stupid evening, I let myself." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and then dropped them, because crying changed nothing. "Do you understand what is funny, Lady Hua? It is genuinely funny. You will appreciate it. I spent a whole year being sold to your golden son so my family could climb up out of the dark. And the only difference between him and this one is that June wanted me to stand next to his face and this one wants me to stand next to his ledger. I am collateral. I was always collateral. I let myself forget it for the length of one dinner because he held me up when I fell and looked at me like." He stopped. His throat had closed. It does not matter what he looked like. It was a man protecting his investment. I have read enough writs to know the difference between being wanted and being needed, and I am very, very tired of being needed. "Garam," Doyun said, "do not." Garam turned on him, and for once in his life the sharpness that lived in him did not feel like a thing to hide. "You let your mother walk in and tell me what I am. You stood there with your hands on me and let her finish before you said a word. You have a flat little sentence for every demand I have ever made, every single one. But the one time it mattered, the one time you could have told me the truth before someone else weaponized it, you said nothing. You are not cold because you are calm. You are cold because telling the truth costs something, and you would rather pay in silence." He was shaking now, and the plum was nowhere, only mint gone sharp and bitter as crushed stem. I will not be kneaded into a bond. I would rather the house fall." "It is not only your house that falls," Lady Hua said. "I know that." Garam's voice cracked on it. "I know exactly whose house falls. That is the cruelty of it. You have built it so that the only way I can refuse to be a thing is to ruin the people I love. You are very good. Both of you. You and your dead son and your living one, you are all so very good at making sure the Omega has no door that does not cost him everything." He should have stopped there. It was a clean exit, and the brush in him knew it, knew the value of the last clean stroke. But he had spent 25 years swallowing the next sentence, and he was done. "I am calling it off," Garam said. "Myself. Tonight. You can put it on me. Tell the creditors the Sohn Omega was unstable, ungovernable, impossible. Tell them I lost my mind, it is even true. Whatever falls, let it fall on me. I would rather be the disaster that broke 2 houses than the furniture that propped them up." He looked at Doyun one last time, and his voice dropped, and this part was not for the mother at all. "You came to fulfill a contract. So did your brother. I am so tired of being a thing that men fulfill." And he walked out of his own family's dining room, past the warlord who did not stop him, into the dark. Doyun did not follow. That was the part that finished it. Garam stood in the cold courtyard, listening for footsteps behind him, and there were none. The warlord, who had moved across a whole room to catch him before he hit the floor, did not move now. And Garam, who had wanted exactly this for weeks, who had schemed and performed and lied to bring about precisely this outcome, the contract broken, the door open, the freedom won, stood alone in the dark and found that getting everything he had asked for felt like nothing at all. He did not know that inside, Doyun had turned to his mother and said, in a voice she had never heard from him, "Get out of this house. Tonight. I will deal with the creditors myself." He did not know that Doyun had stood for a long time in the empty dining room afterward, looking at the cushion where Garam had performed a whole evening of theories about lamp wicks so that a warlord would not notice he was starving. He did not know that Doyun had picked up from beside that cushion a single sheet of paper that Garam had crumpled and discarded days earlier in a staged fit of artistic despair, a sheet Doyun had quietly rescued and kept, a sheet on which Garam had written one character 40 times trying to make it perfect and had thrown away because the last one was wrong, and that the warlord stood there holding that ruined, furious, beautiful paper and did not know how to do the one thing he had never been taught, which was to ask for something he wanted instead of simply doing his duty and waiting to be discarded for it. The days that followed were very long. Garam went home to the Sohn house, which was still standing for now. He told his parents the marriage was off and watched the hope go out of his mother's face and survived it. Barely. His father did not shout. That was worse. His father simply sat down slowly, like a man whose knees had stopped trusting him, and said, "I see," and went to bed before the sun was down. And Garam lay awake, listening to the house that he had chosen to let fall, and could not feel the freedom he had paid so much for. The first day, he was angry, and the anger was easy and clean, and he wore it like armor. He told Sejin every detail of what had happened in the dining room, the debt, the deadline, the warlord standing there with his hands on Garam's arms and letting his mother finish the sentence, and the anger carried him all the way through the telling. The second day, the anger thinned. He kept catching himself preparing complaints. He would notice the lamp oil was the cheap kind again, the kind that smoked, and he would open his mouth to tell someone who would change it, and there was no one, because the someone who had changed it without comment was in a different house. He had wanted, for weeks, to be free of a man who met his every demand. He had not understood that being met was a thing he would miss. The third day, he did not get out of bed until the afternoon. Sejin came and sat on the floor of the brush room and did not make a single joke, and they were quiet together for a long time. And finally Sejin said, "You know he has not sent anyone. No creditors have come to your house. The Sohn debt should have been called by now. Someone is holding it back. I do not want to talk about him. I did not say a name. You did not have to." The fourth day, Sejin said, "You are not eating." And Garam said, "You sound like someone," and could not finish, and went into the brush room and shut the door and sat over the inkstone where he had sat every morning of his life, and his hand would not move. The brush only worked when he was honest, and he could not bear to find out what honest looked like right now. So the paper stayed white, sheet after sheet, the longest he had gone without writing since he was a child. The fifth day, he learned from a servant who had it from a servant that the warlord's house was being packed up, that Doyun had sent his mother away, that he was preparing to meet the creditors alone, to let the whole weight of 2 ruined houses come down on himself and no one else, as he had apparently carried everything his entire life. Garam sat with that for a long time. He thought about a second son sent north to war while a golden first son was kept and adored at home. He thought about a man who had a flat, patient sentence for every demand and no sentence at all for the one thing he wanted. He thought about the bun and the hill that was not a valley and how Doyun had watched him laugh. He missed him. That was the unbearable, ridiculous truth of it. He missed the flat, unbothered voice. He missed being seen all the way through and not punished for it. He missed the man who changed the lamp oil and provided the 4th set of brushes and offered to be insulted at parties as a pair. He had spent his whole life learning that the real Garam, the sharp one, the exacting one, the one who threw away 9 sheets for the 10th, was a thing to be hidden so that he would not be left. And the one man who had seen that Garam entire, mid-tantrum, mid-lie, at his worst, had looked at him as though he were interesting, as though the difficulty were the part worth watching. And Garam had called it off and walked into the dark and gotten exactly what he wanted. On the 6th day, he understood something, and it arrived as the brush always arrived for him, sideways and complete. Doyun had not followed him into the courtyard, but Doyun had also not sealed the bond. The writ gave him the right. A contract bond required only the claiming bite, not consent, not affection, not a willing neck. The old houses treated it as a debt, and a debt could be collected. Doyun could have taken what he was legally owed at any point in those weeks. He held every card, the deadline, the debt, the law, the strength to simply do it. And he had not reached for it. He had spent weeks meeting absurd demands and declining the rest like information, and he had stood in a dining room with his mother handing him every reason to force the bond, and instead he had let Garam walk out the door. He had not been waiting to need Garam into a marriage. He had been waiting to be chosen. The same as Garam. Exactly the same as Garam, the disposable second son sent off to war, while the golden one was kept and adored, the one who did the work and never got the thanks. Garam thought of the rider on the road, the cheerful voice calling up that the family must be glad to have the steady brother home to mind things now, and how Doyun had gone still under it, the thread that had not matched the rest of the cloth. The one you sent for when the favorite was gone and the accounts needed minding. That was what the man had been to them his whole life, and he had stopped expecting to be anything else. He had refused to take the bite because the one thing he wanted that he could not order or earn or win was for someone, once, to want him and not need him. And he had recognized it in Garam the first morning, on the floor, with an ink stick in his fist, dancing because he was free. He had seen the whole of it, and he had stood in the doorway and quietly decided to want a person who had just told him he would rather marry a horse. Garam put down the brush he had been holding without writing for 6 days. "Oh," he said to the empty room. "Oh, you absolute fool. Both of us. Both of us are fools." He did not bother with his good clothes. He went exactly as he was, ink on his fingers, and he made Sejin take him to the other house. And Sejin, who had not written a dispatch in days, wrote one in his head on the way, and it was very short, and it said only, "They are both idiots, and I am going to dance at the wedding." The warlord's house was half-packed. There were trunks in the hall and the cold sense of a household being dismantled, a man preparing to send his mother away and meet his creditors alone and let the whole thing fall on himself, as it always had. Garam found him in a bare receiving room, standing at a window, and on the low table beside him, smoothed flat and carefully weighted at the corners, was the ruined sheet of calligraphy Garam had thrown away. Doyun turned. He did not say anything. Of course he did not. "You kept it," Garam said. His voice was not steady at all. "The bad one. I threw it away because the last character was wrong. I wrote it 40 times, and the last one was wrong, and I threw the whole sheet out. And you fished it out of the rubbish, and you kept it." "It was not wrong," Doyun said. "It was. The stroke is too heavy. The balance fails on the left. It is the worst one I made that week, and I made some genuinely bad ones." "It was the only honest thing in this house," Doyun said. "Everything else here is performed. That paper is the only thing I have seen since I came home that was made by someone who refused to pretend it was easy." He looked at it, and then at Garam, and the door at the end of the long corridor of him stood open. "I kept it because it was you. The real one. Not the one who has theories about lamp wicks, the one who throws away 9 sheets because the 10th might be honest. I would rather have that one furious than the pleasant one grateful. I have always known which one I wanted. I did not know how to say it, so I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was nothing, and I let you walk out the door. That was the failure. Not the silence in front of my mother, though that too. I treated you as a duty to be honored. I should have treated you as a person I wanted, and I made you feel like a thing again, when you are the one thing in my life I have ever wanted for no reason except that I want it. It was the longest Garam had heard him speak. You did not take the bond, Garam said. You could have. You had every right. The writ, the deadline, all of it. You could have collected. I do not want a neck the law gave me, Doyun said. I wanted you to turn around in that courtyard. You did not, so I let you go because the one thing I will not do is need you into staying. I would rather lose the house. A pause, and the corner of his mouth did the devastating thing it had done at dinner. I have lost things before. I have never much minded losing a house. Garam went to him, the last short distance across the bare floor, and this time when their scents met and turned into the clean green riverbed smell, the first rain on dry ground, he did not hate it. He stood close enough to feel the warmth coming off the man, close enough that the plum bloomed and he let it. Finally, on purpose, the first thing he had ever made on purpose with his guard all the way down. I called it off so the cost would fall on me instead of my family, he said. That part I meant. But I have spent 6 days being free, exactly as free as I wanted to be. And do you know what I found out? Freedom is just an empty room if the one person who ever saw the whole of you is in a different house, packing trunks, letting you go because he is too noble and too frightened to say he would rather you stayed. He reached up, and he drew his own collar aside, baring the side of his throat where the scent gland sat beneath the skin, the place a claiming bite would go, and he watched the breath go out of the man at the sight of it. So here is my demand, my last one, and you had better not meet this one with a flat little sentence. I do not want to be kneaded into a bond. I do not want to be collateral or rescue or a thing that men fulfill. He swallowed. I want to be chosen. By you. Out loud. And I am choosing you back, you impossible, silent, paper-saving fool, not to save my family, not to balance your ledger, but because you are the one man who looked at me at my worst and decided that was the part worth keeping. Doyun looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached out and laid his hand along the line of Garam's bared throat, his thumb resting just over the gland against the place where the choice would be made. Then I choose you, he said, out loud. And then he made it true. What passed between them after that belongs to them, and it is enough to say that there was no writ involved, and no deadline, and no debt. The bond was not collected. It was given on both sides in a half-packed house with one ruined sheet of calligraphy weighted flat on the table, and when it was done, the 2 cents in the room had stopped being 2 things and become the one thing they had been threatening to become for weeks, green and clean and certain, the smell of rain finally reaching ground that had waited a very long time for it. The houses did not fall in the end, though that is the less interesting story, and Garam refused to let it take up much room. It is worth telling only this much of it. The creditors who had circled Jun's debts were not gentle men, and they had expected to find at the end of the season a dead heir's leavings and a frightened family to pick clean. What they found instead was Doyun, who had spent his life on frontiers where the only law was whatever a patient man could hold, sitting across a table from them with the relevant papers in order and no expression on his face at all. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply laid out in that flat, unhurried way exactly what each of them stood to lose if they pressed, and exactly what they stood to gain if they waited, and he let the silence do the rest, the way he had once let it do the rest with an omega in a brushroom. The debt was restructured by the end of the afternoon. Garam was not there, but Sajin had it from a clerk who had been, and the clerk said he had never seen men so thoroughly defeated by someone who did not once stop being polite. And Garam, hearing it, felt a fierce and unfamiliar pride that he recognized after a moment as the feeling of being on someone's side. This was, Garam noted, the correct way for such a thing to be done. He had no power over creditors. He was a noble omega of a failing house with a gift for calligraphy and a difficult personality. And if he had marched into that room to deliver a speech, the men would have laughed him out of it, and been right to. But a warlord who held their futures in his patient hands could sit at that table as an equal, and did. And that was how the thing was actually won. Not by the powerless performing courage above their station, but by Garam refusing at last to be managed, and by Doyun standing between him and the people who would have managed him both. Each of them did the thing the other could not. That, Garam decided, was what the whole arrangement had been missing from the start, and what it finally had. The alliance held, though now it held up a marriage instead of the marriage holding up the alliance, which Garam felt was the correct order of operations and said so, frequently. Lady Hua went to live somewhere far away, and was not invited to things, which suited everyone. And Garam wrote. He filled the warlord's cold, austere house with paper, with ink ground fresh each morning by staff he had finally, properly approved, with characters made by a hand that no longer had to pretend anything was easy. His calligraphy hung in every room, the honest, brutal, beautiful work he had hidden his whole life, and the house that had been all bare stone and dismantled trunks became, without anyone deciding it, warm. There was one sheet that hung where Doyun could see it from his chair, a single character written 41 times, the 41st one finally, the artist would grudgingly admit not wrong, and beside it, framed and kept, the original ruined 40th that a warlord had once fished out of the rubbish because it was the only honest thing in the house. Saejin did dance at the wedding. His final dispatch, delivered as a toast, read, "The war is over." Both parties surrendered to each other at the same time, which is the only way anyone wins one of these. I lost every bet I made, and I have never been happier to lose anything in my life. To Garam, who tried to be the worst person in the kingdom, and instead became impossible to leave. And to the warlord who saw it coming from the first morning, on the floor, with an inkstick, dancing. Garam, who had spent 25 years being pleasant and presentable and no trouble at all, looked across the room at the man who had married him for no reason except that he wanted to, and he was now a great deal of trouble, and entirely himself, and home. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.